Hi, everyone. Welcome back to The Victim's Voice. In today's episode, we will cover the horrific murder of a young mother that has continued to go unsolved almost 33 years later. Her family has waited all these years for a break in the case, and they hope by getting her story out there that maybe someone will remember something and come forward. I want to thank Valerie's siblings, Michael and Tracy Brooks, and also Allison and Maggie from Coffee and Cases podcast for helping to provide me with the information I needed to do this episode. This case has rendered almost no media coverage, so without them, I couldn't have shared Valerie's story. Valeri Brooks was born on June 8, 1968, in Lexington, Kentucky. She was the oldest of three children. She had a brother, Michael, who was 3 years younger than her, and a sister, Tracy, who was 8 years younger. All three siblings were close, despite the age gaps. Michael and Valerie did things together often, and he said Valerie never made him feel like he was a pesky little brother. Tracy had an extra special bond with Valerie. When Valerie died, Tracy felt alone. Everyone else in the family had a support system, but Tracy didn't. Valerie had been her support. Valerie was Tracy's person. Valerie always made time for both of her siblings anytime they needed her. She was a strong person who told people what she thought. She was always there for her friends, but if one of them was doing something wrong, she had no problem telling them. According to her siblings, Valerie could hold her own, and she didn't care what anyone thought. The Brooks family owned a business called Bluegrass Kennel, which was located on the property where they lived in Versailles, Kentucky. When Valerie was 12, her parents got divorced. Eventually, her dad remarried, and Valerie's dad and stepmom left Kentucky and moved to Connecticut. Her stepmom was an LPN, a licensed practical nurse, and had been offered a job in Connecticut, so their moving expenses were completely covered. The kids went there to visit their dad, and Michael ended up staying in Connecticut. It wasn't long before Michael's birthday came around, and Tracy, Valerie, and their mom went to Connecticut to visit him. Their mom fell in love with the place and soon after announced that they would be moving there as well. Valerie, however, wasn't happy in Connecticut. She was a Kentucky girl through and through and had no desire to live anywhere else. So after about a year of living with her family, she made the move back to her hometown of Versailles, Kentucky. Versailles is a quaint little town in central Kentucky. The population in 1990 was approximately 10,000. Its motto is Versailles, Kentucky, small town feel you want, urban access you need. It is full of beautiful old homes and even has a castle that's worth $8.7 million. I will post photos of it on the Victim's Voice Facebook page. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other and everyone felt safe. That is, until New Year's Eve of 1990. Valerie worked at the local Thornton's, a gas station convenience store that was located not far from the previously mentioned castle. It was where the local police officers stopped to get a cup of coffee during their shift, and because of its central location, it normally was a very busy place. When the time was right, Valerie eventually wanted to go to school to become an accountant. In the meantime, however, she was working as much as she could to take care of her sons, pay her bills, and try to save a little money. Valerie usually worked alone at night, and according to what her family has said, she never got scared or anxious about being there by herself. On the night of December 30th, the night she went missing, Valerie was supposed to only work the evening shift. But her coworker, who was supposed to relieve her, called and asked Valerie if she could cover her shift, and of course, Valerie said yes. That same night, Tracy had been at her cousin's house. She walked to a nearby store to use their phone to see when Valeri was going to be getting off of work. This was long before everyone had a cell phone attached to their hip, and not everyone could afford a landline. Valeri told her that she was going to stay to cover the night shift and that she could stay at their cousin's house until she got off work in the morning, and then she would come by and pick her up. Or she could walk home. Tracy didn't want to stay there, so she went ahead and started walking home. On Tracy's way home, a police officer who knew the Brooks family, Officer Keith Broughton, saw Tracy walking and stopped and asked her if she wanted a ride. He asked her if she was going home or to Thornton's, since he knew her sister was probably working. Tracy decided to go ahead and go home. If she wanted to go to Thornton's later, she would just walk there, since it was only about a half a mile walk from the apartment. Officer Broughton stopped at Thornton's later that night and saw Valeri. She told him thank you for giving her sister a ride home. When Tracy got to the house, Edward was sleeping. Chase, Valeri's youngest, however, had been wide awake and had gotten into Tracy's makeup. Tracy wasn't sure if he had gotten any in his mouth and was scared that it would make him sick. So she called Valeri to find out what to do. Valeri was calm. She told her sister he would be fine and to just wash his face off. She then talked to Chase. All the noise had woke up Edward, so he got on the phone and talked to Valeri for a few minutes also. Then he handed the phone back to Tracy. That would be the last time she would ever talk to her sister. Around 2 a.m., the alarm was triggered at Thornton's. Within 90 seconds, it triggered a call to 911 and then to the local police to respond. There were at least 4 officers in a quarter-mile radius of Thornton's at the time. One officer was at Woodford Feed, which was about a tenth of a mile away from Thornton's, about a 1-minute drive. It was later discovered that he had been there with an underage girl in his car. By the time an officer got to Thornton's, Valeri was gone. From the looks of things, it looked like Valeri had simply vanished. Everything was in its place, and there was no sign of a struggle. One thing that stood out was that Valeri's purse was sitting on the back counter with all of her belongings in it. Tracy said Valeri never did this. If she needed something out of her purse, she would always put it back under the counter when she was done. She never left it out. Thornton's had live surveillance, but nothing that recorded, which was not helpful at all. There were no other businesses around that recorded surveillance either. It was 1990. So it wasn't as common as it is now to have cameras everywhere. None of the 4 officers that had been in the area during that time had seen any suspicious vehicles or vehicles that were speeding away from the area. Of course, the officer that was at Woodford Feed was most likely distracted by other things. The road that ran in front of Thornton's was a busy road. How did Valeri disappear without anyone seeing a thing? After Tracy had gotten off the phone with Valeri after the makeup incident, she called her boyfriend back in Connecticut. It was while she was on the phone with him that she heard someone banging on the front window. She looked to see who it was and was surprised to see her grandma standing there. Tracy ran to open the door. As soon as she opened it, her grandma frantically told her that she just heard on the police scanner that Valeri was missing. After this, Tracy says she doesn't remember much for the rest of the night. She said while she was talking to her grandma, Edward had overheard what was going on and came out of the bedroom, threw on his boots, and ran out the door past everyone. He was on a mission to find his girlfriend. For the rest of the night, Tracy remembers people in and out of the apartment as everyone started searching for Valeri. She had stayed there to keep an eye on Chase. Valeri's other son, Andrew, was with his dad at the time. Tracy said she remembers calling a friend to come over so she didn't have to sit and wait alone. It wouldn't be long, however, before the search was over. Around sunrise, there was a knock on the door. It was Steve Ward, the county coroner at the time. As he told everyone that Valeri had been located and that she was deceased, everyone broke down. This was just the beginning of a very long nightmare. Who could have hurt Valeri and why? These were the questions that the Brooks family still wonders about 33 years later. That morning, December 31st, 1990, at around 6:30 a.m., a woman who lived 9 miles south of the center of Versailles, near Ford's Mill Road and Sellers Road, was on her way to work, driving down a narrow lane, when she saw something lying on the side of the road. It was Valerie's body. The woman who found Valerie stayed there with her as 3 different agencies arrived at the location: Woodford County, Versailles PD, and the Woodford Sheriff's Department. She was astonished at how they handled what was obviously a crime scene. She said they were walking around everywhere, smoking cigarettes and throwing down the butts. They had called the Lexington Mobile Crime Unit in, but by the time they arrived, the crime scene had been contaminated. Back at the other crime scene at Thornton's, the investigation was not going any better. In fact, by the time Valerie had been found, the store had already been reopened for 30 minutes. Yes, the store reopened at 6 a.m. that morning. That tells you what a thorough job they did collecting evidence and investigating. In the police reports, it is stated that this was a kidnapping and a robbery. This is because there was money missing out of the register. No one knows exactly how much was missing, though. The police and Valerie's family firmly believe that this was 2 separate crimes. Valerie was taken, then someone came in and noticed no one was there, so taking the money had been a crime of opportunity. We don't know much about Valerie's injuries, since her case is still considered open. A lot of the details are being kept close to the vest. What we do know is Valerie was killed with a pocket knife. They know this because a piece of the blade was broken off in her hand. Authorities told the family there weren't any defense wounds, but that doesn't make sense. No one is just going to lie there and let someone stab them and not fight back, especially Valerie. According to Tracy, she was tough and would have fought hard. If the knife blade was found in her hand, then in my opinion, that would be considered defensive wounds. Also, her fingers had been broken, which I feel is another sign that she definitely fought back. Valerie's family thinks she was brought to that specific location to scare her. They also believe this is why a pocket knife was used. Who would bring a pocket knife if they planned to murder someone? They believe she knew her attacker and that the plan wasn't to murder her. But something happened and the plan backfired. Unfortunately, Valerie died a slow, painful death. She did get away from her attacker at least 2 different times. They know this because there were pools of blood in different areas. Valerie fought for her life all the way to the end. Valerie had also been sexually assaulted. This was never reported in the media, which isn't surprising since there was hardly any media coverage on this case at all. There was one reporter that tried to keep Valerie's name out in the public. Her name is Lee Searcy. She works for LEX 18 News now, but 33 years ago, she was a senior at Western Kentucky University, and the Valeri Brooks case was her first big story and first murder that she covered. She was the only media outlet to cover the case consistently. She has continued over the years to keep Valerie's name out there. She says that Valerie's case always stuck with her, and she remembered interviewing Valerie's 2 sons when they were younger. She stated that Andy, Valerie's oldest, has Valerie's eyes. But it was the letters that Andy had written that Lee thought might tug at the viewer's heartstrings and help to bring someone forward who had information. On the 25th anniversary of Valerie's murder, Lee Searcy did a piece on Valerie's case on the 6 o'clock news on WLEX 18, where she is still a reporter to this day. It was called Letters from the Heart. It featured Detective Starks, who was one of the detectives assigned to Valerie's case. Valerie's oldest son, Andy, who was 8 at the time, wrote letters to Detective Starks. Here is one of those letters. Thank you for coming and talking to me and giving me your card. I know you're very busy and work hard catching criminals. I hope you catch the person that killed my mom someday. I loved my mom so much, and I know you will do your best to get him. The letters may have touched a lot of people, yet still no one came forward with any information on who brutally murdered Valeri. The Brooks' frustration with law enforcement over the next 33 years is no secret. The way it has been handled by what Michael and Tracy referred to as, quote unquote, the good old boys club, is beyond disappointing in their eyes. The town and the state that Valeri loved so much has ultimately let her down time and time again. Authorities kept in contact with the Brooks family for the first few weeks after Valeri's murder, and then all communication stopped. It seemed like every time a detective that was on the case got promoted or retired and a new detective was assigned to the case, they would start out gung-ho looking into the case and communicating with the family, and then nothing. All communication would suddenly stop again. The police had a lack of interest in Valeri's case from the beginning. The majority of Valeri's family was in Connecticut. When they heard she was missing, they hightailed it back to Kentucky, went straight to the police station, and asked what they needed from them. Do you need DNA? Do you have questions for us? They thought the quicker the police could rule them out, then the quicker they could find the person who did this. Both Michael and Tracy told me that the police told them they were being, quote unquote, too helpful. How is it possible to be too helpful in the murder investigation of a young mother? Tracy was the last known person to speak to Valeri that night. She had called her the last time when Chase had gotten into her makeup. You would think Tracy would be one of the first ones authorities interviewed, right? Well, you would be wrong. In fact, the local police spoke to her at first, but she was not formally interviewed until years later, when by then she had forgotten a lot of the details, such as names and conversations. She was only 14 when her sister was killed. In October of 2008, 18 years after Valeri's death, Valeri's mother received a package in the mail. It contained Valeri's watch. At first, the watch was said to be missing. Everyone thought it had been taken by the murderer or had come off in the car that night. This is the email Michael sent Beth Thompson, the investigator at the time. I am writing in utter disbelief. You released a piece of evidence to my mother without performing any forensic testing on it. That is unimaginable. The watch in question was a focal point early on in the investigation when it was trying to be determined if the murderer kept any souvenirs. I drove my mother to the mall and we faxed a picture of it to your department. Mother and I are somewhat unsure if she purchased a duplicate and mailed it to the department or not. I have been told that the watch was simply overlooked and was in Valeri's purse the whole time. That doesn't make any sense. The purse and its contents should have been processed into evidence with a detailed inventory of what was in it. Have you looked at that inventory? Was the watch listed? If not, how did it get there? It seems highly unlikely that a watch that size would simply be overlooked. Who had access to her purse while it was in evidence? As much as it may be uncomfortable to admit, it is equally likely that an officer or detective in your police department could be the murderer. As likely as some of the people who have been investigated, that's for sure. I am not saying that I am implicating any officer in particular, just simply pointing out that the possibility exists. And you have broken the chain of custody irrevocably. Did you consider for one moment to find out whose fingerprints were on the watch? Was there any blood evidence in the joints of the watch band? These are questions that you chose not to ask. It's a small detail, but how did you miss it? A thorough investigation appears once again highly unlikely. I have asked my mother to leave the watch sealed in the box that you mailed it to her in. I would highly advise getting the watch back and testing it. It would most assuredly not be admissible in court as evidence, but it also may point you in a direction that you have never considered. The family deserves an answer to why this latest situation was allowed to happen. And if the watch is so unimportant, why not send the whole purse back to my mother? The real aggravation in the whole thing is that we are forced to put our faith and trust in a department and staff who have done absolutely nothing to earn either one of those things. We can't even ask for an outside review of the case to get the small town mind and mentality out of the process. This case has proven to be well above the heads of the Versailles Police Department, and as a department, your parochialism blinds you. And this is the response that Michael received back from Detective Beth Thompson. Good morning, Michael. It has been determined that the watch has no evidentiary value. My apologies for wanting to give your mother something back that has no evidentiary value, but has great sentimental value. And that was it. No explanation as to how the watch suddenly appeared. Didn't answer any of Michael's questions. When Coffee and Cases podcast was researching for their episode on Valeri, they asked the police chief if it was possible to see the inventory list from the items that were in Valeri's purse. They would not show it to them, most likely because it's still an open investigation, so that's understandable. If the watch wasn't in her purse early on, though, then where did they get it from 18 years later? On October 17th, 2018, Michael talked to the Attorney General's office via email. He was told everything, including all the evidence, was going to be transferred from Versailles Police Department to the Kentucky State Crime Lab in Frankfort. It was then going to be cataloged and compiled for easy review and reference. The Attorney General's office said that Angela Williamson, who has a PhD in molecular chemistry and biology, was reviewing Valeri's case from the beginning. She wanted to go over the crime scene photos and everything that was in the case file. They promised to call the family at least once every month. It has now been 5 years, and the family has yet to receive one phone call. Michael says that authorities have shown a, quote, lack of investigative curiosity. They haven't shown inquisitive investigation, attention to detail, or acceptance of outside expertise. At the time of Valeri's death, forensic scientist Henry Lee was working in New Haven, Connecticut. Henry Lee is now a well-known doctor who has assisted in solving over 6,000 cases, many of which were high-profile, such as O.J. Simpson and John Benet Ramsey. He is known for finding microscopic evidence that others have missed. In 1990, Dr. Lee had just helped close the case of the wood chipper murders in Newton, Connecticut. Michael decided they needed Henry Lee to help in Valeri's case if they were ever going to get answers. It took a while, but he finally got a hold of him. According to Michael, Lee said, "Of course I'm willing to lend my expertise." The Brooks family was going to pay for his hotel and plane ticket. It would cost the state absolutely nothing for him to come and help. The only thing they needed for him to be able to come and look at Valeri's case was for the state of Kentucky to request his assistance from the state of Connecticut. Michael was ecstatic that they were possibly going to get some answers. He called the chief of police at the time and told him everything. But the chief did not share Michael's same excitement. He found out later that the chief had passed the decision to the mayor, who then passed it to the coroner, who then passed the decision to the chief of police. The chief of police said, "We don't need him. He's a blood splatter expert. He won't do us any good." There was no other talk about Henry Lee. It stopped there, which is ludicrous. He is a forensic scientist. He has training in many areas of forensics. Yes, he is considered an expert in blood splatter, but that's not all that he knows how to do. And why not just give him the chance? It wasn't going to cost the state anything, so they had nothing to lose. Unless, of course, they were covering something up. and they didn't want it found out. The authorities had told the family they got DNA from the crime scene. They even let it slip at one point that it was sperm. When Michael asked if they ran it through CODIS, he was told that it did not contain enough genetic markers to be entered into CODIS. However, it was supposedly run against a potential suspect, which we will get into him later. If there were enough genetic markers to do that, then why couldn't it be run against DNA and CODIS? They can compile a profile from DNA left on a cup, a straw, or a cigarette butt, but not from a sperm sample? Doesn't make any sense. The family has also asked for the DNA sample to be sent to Parabon Nanolab in Reston, Virginia. This is a company that provides DNA phenotyping for law enforcement agencies. They have helped solve nearly 230 violent crimes in the United States alone. After emailing the chief of police and asking for this to be done, they once again heard nothing. 1 year went by with no response. So Michael reached out to Parabon via email himself, and he got information on the pricing to have Snapshot done. Snapshot reads tens of thousands of genetic variants, genotypes, from a DNA sample and uses this information to predict what an unknown person would look like. In order for Parabon to get involved in a case, they have to receive an invitation from the investigating agency and the detective in charge. Michael emailed Chief Fugate and told him that they would start a GoFundMe to raise the money needed for Parabon Labs to create a snapshot with the DNA sample that they had. All he needed them to do was reach out to Parabon and extend an invitation to them. Here was the email Michael received. Thanks for forwarding this information to me. DNA testing has been done previously in reference to this case at a private lab. We have gone ahead and made contact with Parabon Nanolabs to explore further options. And I'm sure you've guessed, once again, that was it. Never heard another word from them. Allison and Maggie from Coffee and Cases podcast covered Valerie's case in 2021. They live in that area of Kentucky, so they were able to interview the chief of police at that time, Chief Murray. Chief Murray said he understands the family's frustrations. He said he wasn't aware of the Henry Lee connection, as he was not chief at that time. He said they have done all they could for Valerie's case, that they even left it open for the state police to step in. He stated that even though his department is small, they get the same National Forensic Academy training as larger departments do. He said they do a yearly relook and they share information with other departments. If there are new leads or a similar crime occurs, they create a supplemental report. He also stated that the last update in the case was in 2018. However, the family says they are not aware of any new updates. He said he thinks about Valerie's case every time he drives by Thornton's and has even visited her gravesite. He said they are committed to finding answers. He stated that they can't say what they are doing right now with the case, and he also couldn't share any information about the DNA that was found, since it is still an open investigation. He said they are a progressive police department and have consulted with other independent labs and agencies. He said, quote, "The volume of this case is massive," end quote. Not sure if he is referring to evidence or what, but he said they have interviewed many people. He told them he wants the family to know that every December he thinks about Valerie. Detective Murray may think about Valerie every now and then, but her family thinks about her every day. If they are doing so much to solve her case, then why do they not take the time to update the family at least once a year? They would be happy with at least that, but they deserve much more than that. When Michael or Tracy reach out to them, it seems they say whatever they can to pacify them for the time being, but aren't doing anything to get Valerie's case solved. Why, after 33 years, is the case still open and not labeled a cold case? If it was labeled a cold case, then there would be other avenues the family could take to getting her case solved. There are investigators who only handle cold cases. Why is the Versailles Police Department holding on to it and keeping it from being solved? Maybe they don't want it solved, because once it is closed, the family would have access to everything in the case file. Maybe there is something in there that the authorities don't want the family to see. Or maybe they just don't want the family to see what a shitty job they have done investigating the case from the beginning. The family does believe it was someone local and someone she knew. They believe Valeri was outside either emptying the trash or sweeping the parking lot when she was kidnapped. That's why there was no sign of a struggle inside of the store. Thornton's was on Lexington Road, which is a road with a lot of traffic. Yet with it being that late at night, it might have been different. Michael and Tracy told me that Valeri would have never gotten in the car with someone she didn't know, unless someone, like a police officer, pulled up and told her there was an emergency at her apartment or something was wrong with one of the boys or Tracy. If it was a stranger and they forced her into the car, she would have fought and there would have been evidence of some sort of struggle. Also, even if they managed to get her into the car, how did they keep her in there? Tracy said Valeri would have kept fighting as much as she could and would have tried to jump out of the car. Especially because the way they went through town, there were plenty of stop signs they would have had to stop at. Unless it was a car that had doors you couldn't open from the inside, like a cop car. Or some people think there could have been more than one person in the car. The location that Valeri was found at also leads them to believe the person who did this was local. Like I already said, Thornton's is located on a very busy road. If you leave Thornton's and go right, you would follow that road straight into Lexington. If you made a left out of Thornton's, you would come to a fork in the road. If you stayed to the right of the fork, it would lead you out of Versailles and into Frankfort. But the killer didn't go in either one of those directions. When he got to the fork, he went left, which takes you into downtown Versailles, and past the police station. If it was someone from out of town, they would have most likely taken one of those roads that led to Lexington or Frankfort, which they then could have gotten on a highway. Instead, they drove through Versailles to an area that if you didn't know it was there, then you would have never found it. I will post the map on Facebook and Instagram so you can see the route that they took. Valeri was found at the end of a lane off Ford's Mill Road, close to Sellers Road. It is out in the middle of nowhere near a small community called Nonsuch that is also located in Woodford County. It is not somewhere that someone would just happen upon. You would have to know that it was there. There are people from Versailles that don't even know about that road. The area at the time only had one house that was built. The rest were still under construction. Because of all the trees blocking the view, only locals would have known that there weren't any houses built yet at the end of the long driveways. One theory of who killed Valeri was a co-worker's boyfriend named Greg Bright. He was abusive to the co-worker, who also was a good friend of Valerie's. So Valeri had made it clear that she did not like him. The person whose shift Valeri was covering that night was that of that co-worker's. Did Greg come in looking for his girlfriend and find Valeri there instead? Did Valeri say something to him about abusing her friend? As far as Michael and Tracy know, Greg had been cleared and was nowhere near the Thorntons that night. But it's worth mentioning. Another theory was that Valeri was killed by a serial killer who had family in Versailles, named Glenn Edward Rogers. He was also known as the cross-country killer. However, the family doesn't know if he is connected to Valerie's murder because in 1996, the Versailles police ran the DNA evidence of Glenn Rogers, but it was the wrong Glenn Rogers. They ran the DNA of William Glenn Rogers, who had been convicted of killing a 9-year-old girl and was on death row in Tennessee. Versailles police supposedly started making phone calls to the prison in Florida, where the Glenn Rogers, who was never tested, was housed. But once again, the family was never informed on anything after that. And the family is supposed to depend on this police department and trust them when they can't even get the DNA from the right person. And if there was enough DNA markers in the sample to test it against either one of the Rogers, then why couldn't it be run through CODIS? This is one more question we don't have an answer to. According to Michael, in his opinion, the person who killed his sister was either a stranger who got lucky or a police officer. According to Michael, a police officer was heard saying that Valeri got what she deserved. The family doesn't know why he would have said that or if he was even looked into. Tracy told me that when she goes back to Kentucky, it's very weird. She feels like she is constantly being watched. The whole time she is there, it seems like no matter where she is, a city or a county cop is always nearby or following her. Sounds like they're scared of something to me. If a police officer wasn't involved, then it seems that they might have been covering for the person or persons who were involved. Versailles is a town with a lot of old money, so it wouldn't be surprising if someone was paid off to cover up her murder. All in all, authorities have done a horrible job at investigating. It seems that they don't care and are lazy at the very least. Would they have done such a shoddy investigation if it was one of their daughters who had been murdered? I think not. If the police don't give families something to go on, then they can only go on the little that they know, and the rest they have to assume. And after so much time goes by without answers, it only makes the family more confident that their assumptions are correct. In the 33 years since Valerie's death, a lot of things have changed. Her father and grandmother have passed away. Her 2 sons have had children of their own, and Valeri has nieces and nephews that she never got to meet. Tracy explains to me how her sister's death has caused what she calls ripples over generations in the family. When Valerie's nieces and nephews and grandchildren ask about Valeri, what do they tell them when they don't even have the answers themselves? She also has the joy of seeing Valeri and different family members over the generations. Tracy told me that her daughter looks exactly like Valeri. When she was a baby, she looked so much like her, it freaked people out when they saw her. Tracy often wonders who else has been caught in the ripples of her sister's murder. The murderer surely had family. Did they also have kids? 33 years of no answers has been devastating. The Brooks family has become skeptical over the years at people who offer to help. Valeri deserves justice, and the Brooks family deserves to know what happened that night, and hopefully, one day they will. If anyone has information on the murder of Valeri Brooks, please call the Versailles Police Department at 1-859-873-3126. Or you can reach out to Tracy Brooks or Michael Brooks on Facebook. That's all for this week. Come back next week for a new case. Until then, peace out.